So in this discussion, we're going to look at preparing for conferences. And conferences are an important part of the publication process. It's a good chance to share your research among colleagues and people who may be experts in the field, that you can get feedback on what your research is. You can find out what are the important issues that need to be addressed, what are the local controversies that you need to address, perhaps what issues that you may want to avoid that aren't very important. It's a chance of networking among colleagues, meeting people who are in your field, making relationships that you might use in future research. And it's the very kind of most social aspect of the publication process. And since we're connecting publishing and job hunting, conferences are often the places you go to look for jobs, and they're places where you can find the latest books and materials that you might want to use in your research. Choosing a conference, there are a number of factors. There are international conferences that tend to be very large, have lots of sessions. They're usually held in large cities, convention centers. There are local conferences that might be on a more specific topic. They may be in smaller places, maybe probably more of a chance to meet people. They're less impersonal than a large conference. So it depends on, there are more sessions, of course. If you're attending the conference to go to sessions, a large conference is going to have more choices for you. A small conference may have more choices that are directly related to your interests. Location, it is a chance to travel. So again, whether you want to go to a small town or a large city, scenic area, that will be a factor in how you choose a conference. And since we're talking about this topic, fake conferences, there are a lot of conferences that aren't really conferences. They may not have very high quality or very high standards. One way you can tell a fake conference is if they have a very fast turnaround. It usually takes a while for proposals to be evaluated for a conference, and if a conference says we'll evaluate yours in a couple of days, you know there's something wrong with that. For preparing a proposal, most conferences on their call for papers will specify what the proposal should look like. It could be like a short couple of paragraphs, 250, 300 words. It could be an entire paper. It varies according to the conference. There's usually some kind of rubric for evaluating the proposal. The conference may make that public, but there's something they only give to the evaluators. The evaluators, it's not as the evaluators are not as perhaps experienced as they are for journals. They could be. They may not have all the background on your topic. They may have a more general background in an area. They could be experienced faculty. They could be volunteers, anybody who wants to do it. Again, this will vary by conference. Occasionally you get feedback on your presentation, particularly in smaller conferences, so that may help you in future conferences. Sometimes you get the proposal accepted, but they ask you to reword it or explain certain things. The type of presentation can vary between individual presentations. Sometimes you'll present by yourself, sometimes you'll be placed on a panel, or there are group presentations where you go with a group of people. Sometimes you form beforehand. And there are various types of presentations. There are individual presentations, which you do, by yourself or maybe with one or two co-presenters. There are symposium, colloquium, discussion sections. There could be a whole variety of different types of sessions. Workshops are sometimes given before or after the conference. So if you want to go with a larger group of people, sometimes one person organizes this and brings the people on board. Finally, posters. Posters are valued differently in different conferences. Some conferences they're highly valued. Some conferences they're lowly valued. Some conferences, for example, you only give a poster if you got your paper rejected. So they're kind of the lowest value. Some of them are very formal. Again, you need to probably get a sense of the criteria for posters and how they're valued in the conference. Preparing a presentation, nowadays mostly people do PowerPoint or Prezi. There are little differences between them. I wish I don't particularly necessarily understand exactly how they differ. I prefer Prezi. It lets you lay things out in a different way. There are a number of questions about layout issues. Many people who are older and who used to have overheads that they had to pay for. They used to try to jam as much information as possible on one overhead. Sometimes that approach carried over when they started to use PowerPoint, but they forgot to realize that PowerPoint slides are free. You can use as many of them as you want. So there's a lot more sense now of putting very little text on a presentation. Many people just present images and just talk over the images. Don't present too much information. You need to think about what kinds of information you want to present. Are you going to give it a little bit from a paper? Are you going to present bullet points? Are you going to present lots of data? So those kinds of things you need to kind of think about in terms of how you're going to lay out your presentation. The rules for making presentations usually revolve around time. Time is usually very short. You usually get 15-20 minutes. People expect questions. If you run over, it could be very rude, either to other people on your panel or sometimes to the next presentation. Sometimes you'll have people whose job it is to tell you how much time you have left. So if you haven't prepared totally for exactly the time frame, you may have to rush through parts of your presentation. And so try to think about what are the most important things you want to make sure you get out. And that's why I prefer sort of talking more about the results. I don't really talk too much these days about the literature review. People can read it on themselves. Usually maybe the problem I'm addressing, because you just really don't have the time. I've always suggested, although nowadays it's not always feasible, to go to a conference before you present, so you get a sense of, are they reading papers or most people talking? It depends on how comfortable you feel. There are very formal conferences where a person prepares a paper and reads the paper. They could be very difficult to sit through, but other people talk like giving a lecture, and so maybe it's a little more personal to give a lecture. So it depends, and you need to have a sense of what's preferable at a given conference. And those are kind of informal rules. Another rule that I think some people need to be aware of, particularly when they're publishing, is don't present something that you've already published. Some people do. Some people want to kind of pad their CVs by having a lot of presentations, but normally there is some conferences have very strict rules about not giving presentations on information you've actually published. And again, be careful of the audience. It may not be the same audience, particularly if you're going to a larger conference. They may not be the same audience that you write for. They may be more general, and you have to adapt a little more for that audience. Presentations can be a little emotionally difficult when the audience will sit there and maybe they realize they don't really find what you're saying interesting, or it's not the topic they expected, and they walk out in the middle of your presentation. That could be very difficult. People walk in and out. So you have to be, as a presenter, you have to be, confident enough to sort of deal with some of those situations. Conferences raise certain publication possibilities, and again, they may have different values. Some conferences just have proceedings, which may not be the highest level if they're just making copies of things and putting them together. Other conferences, somebody may edit a book, so when you see it, it looks just like an edited book. You don't really know it's even a conference proceedings. Some conferences have journals might publish a special issue on presentations in the conference, and those often count the same as any kind of journal publication. What you have to be aware of is the copyright issues in terms of whether you want future publications. And so in all of these cases, some places will count this as a publication, no matter what the format is. Other places maybe won't count the proceedings as a publication, but you have to be careful in terms of your future publication about whether you're giving up any copyright for this publication. So, but it is a good chance to sort of think about all of these issues, the social issues, publishing issues. But the most important thing about going to a conference is to have a good time.